Well, it's that time again. It's going to be a very exciting episode of In Conservation With. And I've got a very smiley Andrew Budziak with me, who is a renowned photographer, a director, and a host. But we'll talk to Andrew in 1 second after I do the necessaries in terms of reading out, or actually just telling you about the sponsors. The sponsors are Leica Sports Optics and also CJ Wildlife. And for those who don't know who CJ Wildlife are, they're a team of passionate nature lovers and experts in garden wildlife, and they're on a mission to make nature accessible for everyone. So whether you're a nature novice or a garden guru, they want to inspire and educate and provide the right tools to help wildlife thrive right on the doorsteps of everyone. So that's CJ Wildlife. Welcome along In Conservation With. Andrew, how are you and where are you?
I am doing great. I am here right now. It's kind of early afternoon in a very, very sunny Toronto, and we have the fall colors absolutely exploding outside. So she could bring you all out there, but it's a little noisy, and the Wi-Fi is much better inside. So I figured I'd kind of do the talk here from my home in Toronto.
Absolutely, and you look like a keen gardener, if I may not be mistaken.
Well, you know what? My wife and I have decided, we moved from a much smaller place to a place with a little bit more space, and we have these large west facing windows, and we thought, let's take advantage of it. Let's see what we can do. You can actually see behind me that the plant life goes like this, following the sun. So it's just snake plants on that side that can survive anywhere, and closer to the window, the more tropical. So that's our little setup here.
Absolutely. Now, some of the people today and in the future may not know who you are. You are a photographer and director and a host Canadian for presenter, because which actually is, we say host in Britain as well. So let's talk about the host part first. What sort of things do you present?
Sure. So I've done a number of documentaries over the years. I've really transitioned from further afield, out in the bush sort of work, to urban storytelling, which is what I do now. So a documentary actually completed a little while ago, but it's just now out on YouTube. Now that it's gone from the festival circuits and all that stuff. It's called Poisoned Earth. I looked at this, it was an investigation into this program in Alberta and Canada, where the government has been poisoning wolves with strychnine to kind of in this misguided attempt to help the caribou populations out there. So that's called, there's a short doc that I host. It's called Poisoned Earth. It's on Netflix. I've also done a couple of short films about just about photography, sort of how-to stuff and work like that. But the big thing that I do now, which is primarily my full-time job, I host a series called Edge of Frame, which is an episodic show. Every episode focuses on me trying to get a different photo. So the first season, which is just a bunch of short episodes, we shot all in Toronto during lockdown. And this past year, these episodes aren't out yet, but I traveled right across Canada. So I hit 6 cities from all the way out west to physically the furthest point you could be in Newfoundland, which is the furthest point on the East Coast. So that was fantastic. It was like this blitz of urban wildlife from west to east. That will be coming out in January, and the distribution broadcast deal we have is going to be going out on YouTube, so you could watch it anywhere in the world, and it's called Edge of Frame, and I will be letting everyone know very loud and clear on through my Instagram when that's coming out.
I think that's an amazing idea to do that, because in other words, do a series looking at cities. I mean, that's something that in a parallel universe I've been thinking of as well, but for some reason, certainly in the UK, people, or at least the people in power that make decisions in terms of being able to make programs like that, don't seem to be that interested. And I don't understand why, because, you know, and I'm sure a lot of the Zoomers who are regular will know that I'm constantly moaning about this, but I don't understand what it is about urban wildlife that makes the commissioners of these TV channels turn around and say it's boring, or if they do something, it's about foxes or something that we see all the time done 100 times over. Why is that? Or is it different in Canada? Are they more open to things?
You know, there is like, you know, if you look at the, I think anyway, you know, a pie chart of what makes it onto camera in terms of wildlife, the vast majority of that, I think, can be, you know, covered with maybe like less than 40 animals. You have your, you know, polar bears, elephants, birds of paradise, whales, these big charismatic megafauna, or, you know, kind of these incredible smaller creatures. And these broadcasters, they know that works. They know it sells. This is phenomenally expensive TV to make and video. Like to get, you know, a 90-second little scene. I mean, there could be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds invested into just getting that. So I think when these producers and people writing the checks are deciding what they want to do, they're going to err on the side of caution. Luckily, I was able to push my series forward in a way. There, you know, urban wildlife is at its core. But if you watch, you know, when you watch the series, I did a bit of a Trojan horse thing. I wanted people to fall in love with urban wildlife, but, you know, I have food scenes. I'm clowning around. I go diving. I go urban climbing. I check out bars. I do all of this great travel stuff that works. You know, we know that travel stuff works, and I kind of use that to make a Scotch egg, sort of wrap it around my love of urban wildlife, and offered this to people with a checkbook, and they, you know, they went for it. Something about that combo kind of broke the mold, and we were able to do it.
Yeah, because in the UK that doesn't seem to work the same way, because, you know, but what's interesting also, I mean, I was despairing during lockdown. That was an amazing opportunity, because a lot of people were connecting to nature by accident because they're at home and they couldn't go anywhere. And I felt that the broadcasters missed a massive trick. They could have sent someone out in the streets with a camera and just shot what was out there, and then put together this amazing film. This is what's happening on your street at the moment, you know, and that would have been really galvanizing, I think, because I think it's so important. Urban wildlife and the recognition of it and the understanding of it is so important for us to actually understand the world, you know. But yet, I don't know, for some reason, it's not deemed as being that important.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because, you know, more of us are living in cities. You know, as a species, you know, we're becoming urbanized at a, you know, it's been happening over the last, let's say, 150 years, the mass migration to cities. And, you know, because of that, you know, the de facto wildlife that we're going to have the most experience with as humans, like the other animals that we're going to interact with, are urban, right? That's what we're going to see outside of maybe a vacation or a trip to the zoo. It's what's in our gardens, it's what's in our backyards, it's what's in our alleys, on our rooftops, in our streets, in our city parks and forests. That's urban wildlife. And I'm always surprised. I mean, increasingly less so, I think. When I still meet people that are surprised, I'm like, oh, I'm an urban wildlife photographer, and they're like, oh, I never thought of that as a thing. That's strange. That's weird. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, those are the animals you see, right? Like you shouldn't be. Maybe it's almost like it's too obvious that no one's thought about it or thought to do it, and that's what maybe makes it a bit of a hard sell. But you're absolutely right. During the pandemic, that's what we did during lockdown. You know, you're not flying anywhere, you're not really driving anywhere, so you're going for a walk on quiet streets, and the animals, you know, did the same. They came out in droves, and we saw all sorts of great stuff for the first time. And David, I think you're right. I think a lot of us, you know, did get hooked on urban wildlife during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I just love the idea of it, and I'm just saddened by the fact that it wasn't actually taken up. The other thing, I mean, you talked about I mean, we're going to talk about this more later on. Obviously, this is a whole subject, which is urban wildlife photography. But my book before last, How to Be an Urban Birder, my whole sort of dream was to produce this book with images, beautiful images of birds, but with an urban backdrop. And I thought, well, simple, isn't it? So I trawled the internet. I sort of spoke to many photographers in the UK, and some of the answers I got back were like, for example, oh, when I take a picture and there's anything urban in it, I trash it straight away. Or, you know, I'm looking around and I'm finding pictures, but are totally just the bird, no background at all. And in the end, I had to look to Europe, and I found that photographers there were much more up for it, and were actually taking photographs that I felt were in the realm that I wanted to be in. And I've noticed, I don't know about you, but I've noticed over the last few years, this kind of growth in urban wildlife photography, and I'm really happy that over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been urban wildlife photography sections within photographic competitions, and I've actually been lucky enough to judge on a couple of those things, and some of the images are astounding. You know, yours included. I mean, it's just, you know, people are actually starting to use their imaginations, and I love that. Have you been finding that it's become more popular now and people are getting it?
I don't know if it's become, you know, I think the pandemic was the catalyst for that, for kind of spurring that. And if, you know, if anything before that, it was really not maybe necessarily animals, but something with like a human element in there. But the really specific, like what we're talking about, and what I do and what you wanted in your book, which is like cities, urban life, that kind of thing. I still, yes, I think it is growing, but it's still just such a niche pocket of it. But at the same time, I think people really enjoy it, and get a kick out of it, because it is something new. It's a really, we can maybe get into this later. It's a really challenging kind of storytelling, because when you're taking these photos, you need all of the elements, all of the classic elements that make a great photo. So, you know, a bird in flight. You want the feathers to be in focus. You want to see the eyes. You want to see it, you know, doing something magnificent, which is hard enough on its own. And then you have to add in that additional element, that urban element, which is really hard. You're kind of getting two pictures at once, because the background has to be good as well. Like when I give talks about this, when I talk about urban wildlife, one of the things I say is, if you have urban elements in there in the composition, remove the subject, remove the animal, and it still has to be a good picture. Remove the background, keep the animal in, and that has to be a good picture. And then putting those two things together will make an awesome photo. So it's not just enough to get one or the other. They have to work together, which is so hard. Like I would say my portfolio, for the amount of time that I invest in this, the time I've been shooting, is really small, you know, compared to as if I was, you know, focused on, you know, polar bears. The more, you know, typical, you know, what you think of when you think of wildlife photography. I do have I think a relatively small catalog for photos that I'm really happy with anyway, and I think have all those elements, because it's hard, and that might be one of the reasons that we don't see as much as perhaps, you know, more traditional forms of wildlife photography.
Okay, let's wind the clock right back. Let's look at the young Andrew Budziak, and in terms of, how did you actually suddenly realize, you know what, I like looking at natural history? Where did that come from for you?
I grew up in Toronto, which is, like, Canada is really interesting, because it's something like 85% of us live within 100 kilometers of the US border. So we're south. We're really far south, which means you don't have to go very far north for things to get pretty wild. So every summer I would, you know, my folks would, you know, we'd pile in the car, me and my brothers, and we go to, you know, a provincial park somewhere, or we'd rent a small cabin. You know, we didn't have, you know, at that time we didn't have money to be going to, like, you know, Costa Rica or wherever, you know, every summer. So it was a cottage. It was, somewhere with trees and a fire pit and a lake, and that's what we did for a week or two every summer. And then I went to going to summer camp, and it was just always, the outdoors were always just a big part of my life, so much so that I didn't really think about it. Like it was there. It was like, yeah, like I'm comfortable in the forest, and I grew up on these trips seeing moose and seeing black bears and all of those things, and it was just comfortable for me. It was never not a part of what I did, and it wasn't until later that I realized, well, man, that was really lucky. Not everybody. So in one way or another, it's always kind of been with me. And when I got into photography, it actually took a while for me to start doing wildlife photography. But once again, it just seemed so natural. It was like, well, why would I be taking a photo of these things? I see, it's nothing special to me. And then it kind of became special later on when I started doing the photography and doing the storytelling. And maybe, for too long, I took it for granted, but I certainly don't anymore.
Tom, talk me through what happens the first time you picked up a camera. What was it? What were you doing? What were you thinking?
I was 15 years old, and I was in high school. And my high school actually had a really awesome photography program. There was a classroom that had about 20 enlargers in it. For those of you that remember your days in the darkroom. So it had these enlargers and all the chemicals you needed. But I was I was a grade below that. You had to be in grade 11. I was in grade 10, but I was dating a girl who was a year older than me. So I had, from my parents, I had an SLR camera. So I asked her, I was like, hey, like, you're in that course, like, show me how to use this thing. And she did. She showed me how to read the light meter and, expose it properly. And so that was 21 years ago now. I'm 36. And that's just when digital started to become a thing, and nobody knew if it was a fad or not. It's like, is this going to work? These pictures look terrible. These cameras were a fortune. No serious photographers were using them. So I was using, color black and white film that I was developing on my own by myself, and in the darkroom. And all my other friends that were artsy and getting into photography too were like, what do you think of digital? It's like, I don't know. Who knows? But I was extremely lucky that I got my hands on a film camera, fell in love with it, and learned everything the analog way. How to calculate exposure in your head, and ISO and all of those things, and loading and unloading film and all that great stuff. And I feel like even though like I said, I'm 36 now, I don't know many people my age that had that experience. I feel like I was like just the last generation, the last age to learn that. And I just always loved it. From 15 to now, I was always doing photography in one form or another. My mom did a bit. And actually my grandma was a camera fanatic. So when she died, and my mom was moving stuff out of her house, there were boxes and boxes of cameras from like every era. So I actually got my hands on a bunch of those. And this is one. This is an old TLR, which maybe some of you have used. And I actually really was intrigued by this particular one because it shoots more medium format, and medium format is hard and really expensive. So I actually found a kind of film that was still being made at the time. And on the spools of the film, you actually had to get like wire cutters and cut it. So the plastic bits that actually mount, so the spool of film is in the middle, to make it fit, back here where you pop it in, you had to cut it to make the old camera. So somebody at the camera store told me that trick, and I did it. So I mean, I shot some great sort of artsy stuff. You're not doing wildlife on this, but it was fun. So there was also that added element for me going back in time and using some cameras that now are probably 60, 70 years old now, and I'm so happy to have had that experience.
Do you think that we're cheating a bit using digital now?
You know what? I don't, and the reason is that it really is a new art form. Yeah, you could say like You could say like, oh, you could take 1 million photos and you look at them, but it has it like film has its challenges and digital has its challenges. Look at a National Geographic from 1991. Those images aren't sharp. The optics were not there. As much as cameras have evolved, glass has gotten so pure and so good, and we know so much about optics. So yes, digital can allow us to cheat. You could look at every single photo you take as you go. Memory cards are cheap. You could blow off 1 million photos. You could get now, you're up to the whatever 28 frames a second when you're doing your bursts. But the standards are so much higher. Things have become so much more like the best photograph, or like a passable wildlife photo in 1991. If you brought that to a National Geographic editor today, they'd be like, what is this? Like, we can't run this, the optics aren't there. So it's so hard. And now everyone has a really good camera. Your phone has an awesome camera. So the stakes are so much higher. Costs have come down in a lot of ways, and you don't have to pay expensive printing costs and buy film and all this stuff. We have Lightroom on our computers. We have more than enough. So yes, in some ways, maybe it's cheating, right? For the things that you can do, but in others, it's a completely different ballgame in terms of the standards and what we expect from wildlife photography.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's fascinating, actually. The question I wanted to ask you was the fact that, for example, I'm a birder that happens to have a camera, and I think I've gone through the whole evolution from having a Brownie, that's how old I am, to kind of, picking up a Polaroid camera, to picking up one of those early sort of compact cameras. And I'm trying to take pictures of birds. I remember once being in Los Angeles, and there was a couple of mourning doves on the balcony of my hotel, and I snuck out with my little Fuji camera to take a picture. And, for me, it was great. But no, it wasn't that good. And then you kind of, you evolve and you get this camera envy, because I remember looking at other people's photographs on Facebook and thinking, how is that so crisp? And so what do you say to people who want to take up photography? Because I want to, we're going to look at some of your photographs in a second, but I just want to, what do you say? Because there's so many people out there taking photographs. Is it true, do you think, in saying that you can't buy the eye?
For every camera that you have, any possible camera that you can have in your hand, from something you got, you borrowed from a friend, or something that something you spent $1 bajillion on, there is always a kind of photography that's going to work for that camera. What needs to be altered is expectations. If your budget's $1,000, you could get something, you could get a lens and a camera that's going to allow you to do some kind of bird photography. But if you want these magnificent images, close up, where you have the eye of the crow and that's what you're seeing and the moon's reflected in there or whatever, that's going to be a $20,000 setup. You have to be aware of the limitations of your gear and shoot within them. And that's when you're going to get really good photos. And like you said, you can't buy the eye. Focus on the technique, focus on composition, focus on getting better. And you might realize that, okay, I've always wanted to do this, go to the, go on a safari tour and get this photo of a lion and have all this big gear, and you're kind of working towards that. And chances are, if you really focus and you stick with it, you're going to fall in love with a different kind of photography on the way. Right? Like as you're going along your photographic journey, it's the gear you have, and you pull off that awesome picture, whether it's, the sparrows in your backyard, or raccoons or badgers or whatever, something kind of a bit closer, where you don't need that crazy long lens for, and you don't need the big travel, the big budget. It's just about managing your expectations. And certainly there are kind of photography, not every camera is going to cover every kind of photography, but you're right about it doesn't help with the eye, right? Those things come first.
Urban photographer in a webinar, that urban wildlife photography.
Catty, listen, do you mind if we can actually have your question at the end, the Q&As, if you don't mind? Yeah? Is that possible? So if you can mute yourself, that'd be great. We'll get your question at the end. Andrew, I can't see you, Andrew. But anyway,
Oh,
Andrew, there you go. Andrew,
yeah.
basically, one question I wanted to ask you, another question, actually, I've got loads of questions I want to ask you. Who are your inspirations photographically? Are you inspired by other wildlife photographers? Because, for example, I'm not a photographer, even though I take pictures, but my inspiration has always been actually way outside of nature. In fact, my favorite photographer is a guy called William Eggleston, who in the 70s, he's an American, and during the 70s, he used to take pictures in the Midwest, just about to say the Wild West, the Midwest, and he took pictures of these random things, like he'd take a picture of a lampshade or the side of a car. But beautiful, it was amazing. And plus, I think he was the father of colorization. So he began to, he took all these abstract pictures of like telegraph wires and what have you. And I kind of, with my little my little sort of compact camera, I did the same too. I'd see something and I think that looks interesting. And I've noticed that in my sort of life now, when I take pictures, I'm looking at, if I see a shape and I think that's interesting, and there's a bird there as well, that works for me. And plus, when I see other people's work, if I'm judging the competition, if I see something that, like, especially, I mean, there's another photographer, I can't remember his name. I don't know if it's a wildlife photographer even, but I got a couple of his books, and I think they're self-published, but they're like a vista. And in the picture somewhere is a bird, and it might be a tiny little dot. It might be blurred, flying away. And I love that. I think that's really interesting, because for me, that's what you see in real life, But anyway, sorry, who inspired you?
No, and I think as you were writing, I'm glad you were actually saying that, because it gave me a second to think about who my favorites are. And like you said, the way like I think you fall in love with the style, right? And there are so many photos that you look at and it's like, I don't know who did this. Like, I don't know who did this, but some are unmistakable. It's like, who took that photo because it's so stylized. And that's something I really try to work towards, is having a personal style. So I love the work of photographers that have that. And some are unknown, some are like super well known. I think for the purpose of this conversation, I'll talk about Richard Peters. Some of you might know him. He won. He was one of the winners of the Wildlife Photography of the Year Award, hosted by the Natural History Museum. You might recognize his stuff. He did all this stuff in his backyard with badgers and foxes. And I'm just trying to see if I have. Right here. Sorry. So he's, so he does a lot of camera trap work, and although his work isn't necessarily urban, it's his backyard, and he's a little bit outside of a city, his style is phenomenal. And when I started doing urban wildlife photography, I was looking at his work, and I'm like, what is this stuff? He's using flashes, the composition's perfect, all of this stuff. And he published a book. So I bought the book and I read it cover to cover. Like, I stayed up all night reading this damn thing. And like, I want to know all your secrets. And the secret is this. So this is by a company called Camtraptions that's based out of the Cotswolds. And this is a remote sensor for a camera. So his book is phenomenal, and he lays out how he did this, and the evolution of it. He sets his camera up at night. He has flashes, and he has this thing that senses an animal. And the animal passes it. It takes the photos, and he wrote this. He was on this technology very early, and this company, Camtraptions, worked with him. So it's been amazing for me to have this photographer whose work I love. I've never met him. I think through Instagram we may have corresponded once or twice, but I have so much of my career is based on his work. So not only do I love what he does, but I've been able to kind of use him as a ladder. Like, he's he's paved the road for a lot of what I've done. So not only does he have great style, but he's been able to innovate in a lot of ways, and I've been able to take what he's done and apply it into urban settings, which is how I get a lot of my images is based off what he has done.
Yeah, he's a fellow Canadian, yeah.
No, he's in the UK.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm not gonna remember where I was. I believe he was in London, and then he moved out further away, somewhere slightly more rural. So he has foxes and badgers coming through his backyard, and that's why he's been able to do those photos like 5 feet from his back door.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen. Let's take a look at some of your work, because I'm itching to show the world and the Zoomers all of this. Let me just see if I can. I've got all these things come up all of a sudden. Can you see the screen clearly, folks? I hope you can.
I can. Looks nice, full screen there.
Yeah, because I can't. I got things in my way. But anyway, here's a raccoon going for a walk, as you said earlier. Talk us through how did you get this image?
So this, I mean, there were hundreds of hours of work that went into this photo. The setup is what I just described, which is a DSLR, 2 flashes, a whole bunch of wireless transmitters, and that little camtraptions box. So this is a culvert that runs under one of the widest highways, not one of the widest, but a very wide highway in Ontario. It's just a little bit outside of Toronto, and it's probably 5 lanes each way. So in total, it's about a 10 lane highway. And this is a culvert that connects this little conservation area, really in the heart of a city called Mississauga there. So I had been shooting around there, and I discovered this culvert, and right away when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, like I'm going to get a photo here. It had the graffiti. There was, as you can see, there's about like an inch of water. So it's pretty easy to walk around. And at one part I had to throw rocks in to make a little bridge for myself to get through some deeper water. But what was great is there's this constant flow of water and a little bit of mud. So I was able to see paw prints that were from the previous day. They wouldn't last very long because of the rushing water. So I looked, and right away I saw like this crisscross of raccoon tracks. So I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be good. So I had a photo assistant at the time that I was working with. I needed it for these late night stuff, just because I had so much gear to carry, stands and all of this. So I took for night one, I brought a whole bunch of stuff down. I had a setup. I kind of rushed. I was so excited, and it just wasn't interesting. The background wasn't right. It was a weird part. I had the lighting weird, and the animals didn't cooperate. I think I ended up with like 8 photos of raccoons' butts. So I had been working on this kind of photography now for about a year or so, and really intensely, like a lot of late nights, a lot of experimenting, a lot of failed shots. So I knew this area. I'm like, I'm going to get something here if it kills me. So I spent a couple more nights, and then one night, as I was setting up, I found this view and the tunnel, and I had the idea of putting a flash at the far end of the tunnel so you could see how big this thing is, and then a low flash, illuminating the raccoons. By that point, I had a sense of how big the raccoons were, and what part of the tunnel they were using. So I set this up at about just as the sun was going down. It was 7:30 or 8 or something like that. Set it all. Double check my settings, double check the batteries, double check the frequencies. Everything was good. Left the tunnel. And often when I do this stuff, I'm leaving all this gear out overnight. So I'm leaving thousands of dollars worth of equipment just out in weird spots. So I came back the next morning, and the biggest win is when my gear is still there. That makes me happy. That no one smashed it or hucked it in the water or walked home with it. So the gear is there.
Does that ever happen? Have you ever had your stuff snipped?
No. I've been approached. I've had people wondering what I was doing. I've had a couple of close encounters. I've picked up my gear a couple times preemptively. I see people kind of moving towards me. And for the first couple months of doing this, I'd stay out all night. So I'd set up at sunset and stay till like 4 or 5 in the morning. So a couple times, I just scooped up my gear and kind of took off before these shady characters got anywhere near what I was doing. You could sense when people are coming up to you when it's going to be trouble. But now I have redundancies of everything, which certainly isn't cheap, but it saves my sanity where I do leave this stuff out and just go to bed. So when I came back that morning, I checked my camera and there were a couple images of raccoons crossing, a tail, a nose, a butt. And then I saw that one and I zoomed in to make sure, I nailed the focus and all of that stuff. And it was there. I had the image. I had to do, so this is all this, I shoot raw. I had to do almost nothing to this photo, in post. Like the light levels were all there. It was really like, it was all there. I love the image. It's done really well. It was a Canadian Geographic photo of the year, the Royal Ontario Museum. It was their photo of the year. Made a couple of lists, which was really thrilling. And it's hard to replicate. I only, going forward at this trajectory, I'll probably only get maybe 3 successful photos like this a year if I'm lucky, like ones that actually work where all the pieces kind of come together. So that's the story of this. It was a hard fought photo, and I'm happy that it's resonated with people.
No, it's a fabulous image, and to me, it just typifies, it represents all that is urban photography for me, urban wildlife photography. It's just, it looks as if it is, or you are a fly on the wall watching this guy do his normal thing every night, and he's totally unaware. It's a beautiful shot. Let's move on to the next one, actually, while we're on the subject of photos. And of course, now that I'm pressing buttons, it works. Oh, there you go. Maybe that works now if I do that. It's weird that I've actually I can't even turn I can't even get the next one to work. Let me just okay, I've got to do this now. Yeah, so basically we're going to look at another shot of yours. I'm going to have to reshare the screen, unfortunately, because it it works in it works when you do it in practice before you start recording, but of course it doesn't when you do it live. But anyway, beautiful shot of a long-eared owl here. Talk us through this one. This is a beautiful bird.
Yeah, thank you. There is a park. I can't call it a park. It's absolutely massive. It's an old military base in Toronto, where it's just kind of an owl hotspot, and that has caused a lot of problems and a lot of grief for these animals. Photographers know about it. They're there all the time, really doing bad stuff. Using flashes, which is insane, throwing sticks to get the bird's attention, shaking trees. And these aren't like iPhone photographers. These are photographers with big, long lenses. Like, presumably they've been doing this a while. And the situation got so bad that there was a saw-wheat that actually had a flare-up of avian pox due to the stress of the situation. It kind of passed out and its eyes were all crusted over. So I actually went to go photograph some of the treatment of that bird. So it's a spot that I used to visit. And I obviously wasn't throwing sticks or shaking trees, but I just decided, I was like, enough of this. I don't want to be contributing to this problem. So I kind of stopped shooting there. They happen to have a park there with because it's an old air base with like an old Royal Canadian Air Force wooden plane, and my son loves it. So I'll go with him. And that day I happened to bring my camera with my long lens, just because there are coyotes there as well. So sort of had it over my shoulder. And after my son was done playing in this plane, we just went for a walk. And there are these two yellow eyes, kind of staring at me. And you've probably all had this experience where you pass a set of eyes that are kind of eye level in the bush, and it startles you. It makes you jump, right? It's like, oh God, there it is right there. So I there was no one else around at that time. There were people there, but they had moved on. So I spent 30 seconds taking that photo. Made sure my son could kind of see it. I was like, hey, that's an owl. He's like, yeah, I don't care. I want to go back to the wooden airplane. So I got that in about 30 seconds. And that was it. That was the experience. And I've spent enough time studying owls to know their body posture and when they show signs of distress. Unfortunately, when owls are stressed, they'll do things that make for better photos. So they'll bring their heads down, kind of puff up. They'll turn sideways and display all of their feathers to look really big. This is what I call sleepy eyes. So this is kind of this like grumpy eyed thing that owls will do when they're sleeping, where they kind of look around and then they do this squint, which means their eyelids are about to close. And that's purely from me having kind of spent time and speaking to biologists and reading a bit. And owls actually won't hunt if people are around, like if they're a diurnal animal, they're not like there are things that they won't do that they normally would do if they were around, but they otherwise look, to our eyes, they look content. So I really advocate for people that do owl photography to just learn a bit about what stresses them, what causes trouble. I'm going to be possibly starting a campaign this year called Roost in Peace, which is just a thing for wildlife photographers, just trying to encourage people to leave the owls alone. Don't do it. Don't go stalk them out. If you're walking and you come across and you have your camera, take your images and move on. Don't hang around. Spend your 30 seconds. That's all you need. Get your image and go. If it's not the ideal image, so what? Leave this animal alone. They face so much stress that I'm really, as our situation is right now in Toronto and a lot of North America seeing the same thing. Just leave the birds alone, right? You're not doing any good, and in fact, you could be doing a world of harm to them and their breeding habits and their behavior and all of this stuff. So just get your picture and go.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I lead tours to Serbia where we actually look at the owls that are roosting, and basically they are, I'm very protective of them, as are the locals. And, I don't publicize the sites where we can actually see them at eye level. I take everyone to Kikinda where they're really high up in the trees. But this whole question about behavior photography is one that's irking a lot of people and has done over the years, certainly in Britain, where people are just going so close to wildlife, even with massive lens, are still getting really close and flushing things off. I mean, I've nearly got into fights over this myself. I don't know what to say or how to go about this in terms of what to say to these people, because to me, they're not proper wildlife photographers.
No, I don't think so. If you're gonna play the game, you got to play by the rules, and they're not playing by the rules.
Yeah. All right. Let me show you. Let me see if I've got problems tonight with my sharing, because for some reason, can you see the whole screen?
Yep. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was, as I was mentioning, that series that I was on, that I had shot, that I had hosted. We went from Vancouver all the way to St. John's, Newfoundland, which is the furthest you can be in North America. People from the East Coast, the Atlantic provinces, are just absolute characters. Full of life and just super fun. Got to the airport. I'd arranged for a car to meet us so we could have our rental car. Told the guy what I was doing. He's like, okay, you got to head to Signal Hill. You got to go to this area. There are these foxes there. I'm like, oh, hell yeah. So we ditched our bags to the Airbnb. Got mails. That's what we were doing. I was making the justification that for part of the year, whales are urban mammals because they come for their feeding. They come right into the cities. So this we went up to this place called Signal Hill, which is this old military base that's St. John's, Newfoundland there in the background. It looks out onto the city. And the first thing I saw before we even parked was a fox running across the road with a hamburger patty in its mouth. And I was like, oh God, this isn't good. So got out, kind of surveyed the scene. There were people up there that had left a pile of hamburger patties for these foxes. And all of this is on camera. You know, I'm talking about this. I'm like, this is really bad. So I tossed the hamburger patties, you know, chatted with a couple people, and they were like, oh yeah, I bring food up here all the time. I'm like, don't. Like, for so many reasons, it's so bad for them. And I was like, look at these foxes. They're weaving in and out of cars. There's people, they're coming up. Kids are coming up to them. I'm like, a kid's gonna get bit, and then all these foxes are gonna get shot. Like, that's what's gonna happen. Like, that's that, and it's gonna be 100% your fault. So I decided in that moment that I was going to step back, kind of let the crowds go a little bit. And I wanted a photo of how the fox should be, which is like, you know, wild and free and just beautiful. This is what's called a silver fox, which is actually a melanistic like version of the red fox. So this is they get this dark coats with this silver, and they look unbelievable. They're not like the rarest animal in the world. These morphs do happen. I don't even know if it's a morph. It's just the you know, the melanism. But you know, you do see them. But this one was just like perfect. I was like, I want a photo kind of showing how this fox was. So as people kind of left, it just picked this spot a little bit off the road and just sat in the sun and like did what we were doing, which was just enjoying this sunset in the city. So I actually put away my long lens, and this is just my 24-105 on, and I kind of just dropped the camera down. I was kind of leaning on this wall and dropped it down. The fox saw me, like didn't care, kind of fell asleep. Then it got up and it just was looking around, and I snapped this photo with the city in the background. And you know, I like it. I like the urban elements there. I like the sun, and I like this animal a lot. And the story behind it too is important. When the episode comes out, you know, that's how we start our St. John's, Newfoundland episode, which is like, don't feed these damn foxes, because you know, they're beautiful and you're going to get them killed.
Yeah, I mean, baiting is one issue that, again, is something that needs to be controlled, really. Let's look at the final picture.
Yeah. So,
love this one, by the way. Love it.
Oh, thank you. I actually have this printed in my house, and for the longest time, it was the only image that I had that I put up on the wall, just because I like it a lot. Coyotes are unbelievable. You know, in all the places where we've eliminated wolves in North America, the coyotes have taken over. They've followed us. They've followed human development. They are so good at finding these really cheeky ways of living beside us. I know there's an entire ocean between us and them. Between where I am and where you are, David, in the UK. I wouldn't be surprised if they found their way over there somehow. And you know, in 10 years' time, you know, the cover of the Guardian was a fox, you know, trotting over Tower Bridge, because they're so bloody smart, and they've migrated so far, and they are just these unbelievable creatures. I mean, I could go on forever about coyotes. They're smarter than wolves, because for most of their evolution, they've had to live alongside wolves and be really scared of them. So wolves are on average about anywhere between 50 to 25% bigger than a coyote. Wolves never were able to urbanize, mostly, you know, because of their size and their behavior. Coyotes were smart enough and figured it out. My favorite fact about a coyote is when coyotes arrive in cities. So for instance, in some cities in the south of the US, coyotes have been there for as long as the city has. So those there are generations and generations of coyotes. The longer a coyote has been in a city, the less likely they are to get hit by cars. So think about that. That means that coyotes have learned how to read traffic. And if there's generations of coyotes that have been there, they've taught their young how to cross the road. There's footage of coyotes looking at stop signs. Signals like green means go, that there are going to be cars. Wait for the signal when it's okay to cross. Like, they can read traffic. If you point with your finger, a dog will look at the tip of your finger. Dogs don't understand you're pointing. Coyotes do. How they know that, I don't know. So in any city, people are always getting worked up about coyotes. There's conflict and people feed them, and then somebody gets nipped and a whole bunch of coyotes get killed, and people freak out because they let their, horrible little, chow chow run around somewhere and a coyote gets it by the neck, even though there are signs everywhere, don't let your dog off leash. So I've taken a lot of photos of coyotes. And my goal, along with the urban elements, is sometimes I just want a photo like this. This is taken about, I would say, 150, maybe, maybe 100 meters from a super busy thoroughfare in this city, just in this kind of dense bush that you have to follow deer trail to kind of navigate. And I just came across this stunning coyote, and there were pups in the area, so it actually escorted me, which is a process where they'll kind of bark and follow you, and they'll yip and follow you, and what they're doing is escorting you away. So they get between them and their pups, they yip at you and kind of push you off. So I knew what was happening. I was being escorted. So as I was walking, and what you see, those trees in the foreground, that's the barrier. That is the end of this coyote's territory. So it stopped right there. And I walked to the other side, and it was done yipping and wanted to make sure I was leaving. So I took a couple of seconds. It was sort of done with me, realized it wasn't a threat, looked up at something in the trees, and I snapped this image. And this is how I want people to, the same with that fox and you coyotes. They're gorgeous, they're wild, they need to be left alone, they need to be given their space. If you let your cat out at night and you live near a ravine and it gets eaten, that's on you, right? If a beautiful rotisserie chicken shows up on my table, I'm eating it, and that's the same as letting your cat roam free, or your little crummy dog. So to me, this is a photo that I like. There are no urban elements in there, but it's the king of urban wildlife just living how it should.
Yeah, I just think it's such an incredible private moment, and it's so beautifully lit as well. His face, it's just that when I read about coyotes, I'm seeing a lot of stuff about how dangerous they are, and they've killed a couple of people over the last couple of years and all that sort of stuff. Are they dangerous?
There's one fatality from coyotes that happened out east. It was a young girl who was an experienced hiker. Taylor was her name, and there's a lot of weirdness around that story that has people baffled. Not just the story, the behavior of the coyotes itself, but there's all sorts of mystery around it. And that was a one-off. And dogs kill way more people than coyotes do. And this they're dangerous in the way that any animals of that size is dangerous. If you do things you shouldn't be doing, like I said, if you have cats or dogs. In Vancouver, there's a park called Stanley Park where there are all these famous, they're famous for coyotes for years. And the hand feeding got so crazy that the coyotes were getting so bold and expecting food from people. So they were nipping at joggers, nipping at their feet, nipping at their butts, displaying aggressive behavior to our eyes, which is essentially, hey, feed me, right? Feed me. So the problem with that is, the huge problem is they ended up killing, I think it was like 18 coyotes the city killed. There are bylaws about not feeding wildlife, and not a single ticket had been issued in Stanley Park. So there are all these tools, all these powers that authorities have to quell feeding, and they weren't, they just decided it was easier to kill a lot of them. So, like I said, they're dangerous as they be with any animal. If you habituate something that you have food, then yeah, it's going to nip at you. Yeah, it's going to be trouble. But a coyote that hasn't been hand fed wants nothing to do with you. Nothing. It will defend its pups. It will let you know you're getting too close. It will eat a tasty cat, or a little dog. If your dog's off leash and threatening, yeah, that coyote's going to see that as a threat. But they're not predators to humans or most animals for that matter. They're much happier eating mice, rats, and voles and little bugs. That's what they want to do. But when we come in and interfere, that's where conflict happens.
Okay. If someone wants to actually become a wildlife photographer, what would you suggest in terms of, equipment for start? What kind of equipment would you actually suggest someone got?
It all depends on budget, how much you want to spend. But right now, what I say an absolute winning combo is this camera that Canon has just discontinued, but they're all over the used market. It's super affordable. It's the 6D Mark II. It got slaughtered in the reviews. When this camera came out, people were just angry about it. There was something people hated. And I read the specs and I'm like, this looks pretty great. And the camera did a couple problems, but it was so affordable and it's such a great camera. And some of my best images I've taken on that camera. And if you could find it, in the used market or somewhere around, it's got everything you need. And you could I'm just trying to do the math in my head. You could get it for well under, probably under 800 pounds, way less than that. I'm thinking in US. It's a great DSLR and it's going to have everything you need for this kind of photography. The lens, nothing beats the Sigma 70-200 2.8 sports lens. That is such a good build of a camera. The optics are incredible, and the 70-200 2.8 range. Everybody makes that camera. That Sigma is phenomenal, and it's one of the cheapest. So whatever DSLR body you have, those two together, it's a really affordable package, and it's going to get you're going to get a lot of life out of that. Yeah, these are older pieces of gear, but they're still fantastic. I still use that setup. That's sort of my second camera setup. I have a mirrorless Canon with a big 200-400 lens, this big massive thing that I need for some of the work that I do, but that's always with me in my bag. That 70-200 range is phenomenal. And at 26 megapixels in the DSLR and in the Canon, you could zoom in, you can crop. It's just a great combo. And that's what I recommend to everybody.
Fantastic. If you could be anywhere in the world, Andrew, anywhere right now, where would you be? I'm
dying to go back to Vancouver. I've been there. I was there a bunch last year, and I dive as well. I scuba dive, and I'm starting to do more aquatic photography and video work, and finding some way to bridge the storytelling gap between urban wildlife photography and aquatic photography. And I've had moments where I've kind of come close, but Howe Sound in Vancouver, if you can ever go, Vancouver's on the West Coast, and it's on this harbor, and it filters out into Howe Sound, HOWESOUND, Howe Sound. Google it, and you'll know why I want to go back there and get in that water. It's this dark green water, and you go down, and they have these plumous anemones and this crazy stuff. And you'll never see this in Blue Planet. You'll never see this in Planet Earth. You'll never see this anywhere else. I don't know why. It's just ignored. And it's popular for diving, but nobody's shooting there. It's so deep that they actually get a giant squid sometimes up on the plaster on the rocks that come up a little bit. There are orcas there. There's all sorts of stuff. And just take me back, man. I'm ready to go.
Fab. And can you tell us what your favorite personal shot is? Your favorite photograph that you've taken?
Yeah, It really depends on the day. All of those ones that you've seen today, I really do love. I have another coyote photo that I kind of like. That's not. It's fine. It's a coyote walking on the sheet of ice, so it's all white. You just see this coyote kind of in the top left corner, and I took that at a park, overlooking this frozen lake. And my son, once again, we were out for a walk. My wife was there. My son, he was like 4 at the time, and I was like, dude, like just be quiet, right? There's a coyote. So he's watching the coyote, and as I'm taking this photo, this person walked by, and my 4-year-old just turned to this guy and went, shh, like shushed. I was like, there's a coyote, like, shh, man, like be quiet. And I'm like, okay, I appreciate it. It was like this really funny moment, right? It sounds like shushing this. And then after I finished taking the photo, I'm like, all right, let's go. He's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So I was like, what are we doing? I'm like, we're going home. He's like, well, let's get some rope. I'm like, rope? He's like, yeah, we'll get the coyote, we'll tie a rope around its neck, and we'll take it home, and it'll live with us, with our cat and you and mom. And I'm like, we're not, no, like it's wildlife. And he's like, that coyote would love our house. I'm like, I don't think it would. I don't think it would. So anyway, when I look at that photo, it reminds me of that interaction and some of these great times that I've had with my son, beside me doing, some of these kind of less challenging shoots, or when we're out for a walk, I just have my camera with me and watching him. And now, now he's 5, getting to learn about, tracks and what's out there, and birds and bird calls, and seeing these things, and kind of having his favorite animal. So that story just, makes me recall that super fun little moment.
Yeah, what a great story. Okay, Zoomers, just to let you know that we've got some great in conservation with to come. We got on the 27th of October, 7 p.m. Is that BST now or GMT? I can't remember now. I can't remember when the British summertime ends. But we've got Dr. Bob Plank, and he'll be talking about the story of Xenocanto, which is that amazing library of sounds, bird sounds in particular. On November the 8th, we have Ifan Li, who's talking about bird conservation in China. And on the 10th of November, Barend van Gemmerden, and he'll be talking about the conservation of migratory birds, and there's a whole load more. So check out the page on the Urban Birder World. And remember that if you are not an Urban Birder World community member, that you're not going to see what's going to be happening next, which is a Q&A. So if you're not, then let me just say, Andrew, what a fascinating hour we spent talking about urban wildlife photography and hearing about how you actually do your stuff. I feel as if I should grab my camera and go out now and sit somewhere in the rain to see if a fox might walk past under some light that could make it look sexy. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody. This has been a blast.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for agreeing. I mean, I don't know Andrew, by the way, and I saw his work online. I thought, I got to talk to this guy, and I'm really happy that he actually responded to my garbled message on Twitter. Zoomers, thank you once again for tuning in. I really appreciate that. And please, hope to see you again in the future. And don't forget the golden rule, keep looking up.